So, with us today, I'm pleased to announce that Dr. Dana Ingalsbe is here to talk about creating and developing the online course community. And Dr. Ingalsbe is the department chair of applied engineering in the School of Business and Industry. So, thank you for joining us today. And please take it away, Dr. Ingalsbe.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to share with all of you. I'm going to just say from the beginning that I'm not necessarily the voice of authority on this topic, but it's been very helpful to me to research and prepare for this presentation. So I hope that it helps some of you as you navigate the creation and development of online courses. You know, I was telling Chris in a conversation recently that, you know, we focus so much on the tools of Canvas in particular and how to create our courses and kind of the nuts and bolts of them, and that this talk is going to be somewhat about Canvas, but more about the idea of the social aspect of the class, trust, and developing rapport with your students. And so I hope that it's helpful to you. If we haven't met, my name is Dana Ingalsbe, and I've been teaching here at JSU since the fall of 2002. And so I've been here a little while, and I've been teaching online since 2006. I am going to be talking today about creating and developing the online course community, and really talking about learning communities, which are a little bit different than just your general online course community. Learning community is something that's more developed and has some distinctive purposes in its development. And so I hope that this isn't a one-sided presentation. I'm hoping for some interaction, and so I was really pleased to see that I will be able to see your comments in the chat area. And so please feel free to write your comments, or feel free to raise a hand now that we have that feature, and add your perspectives on this. So let's go ahead and get started. So today I'm going to be talking about what is an online course community, what is a learning community, and why is that relevant to our discussion, and then what can an instructor do in order to develop this kind of community in the online classroom. And some of this is certainly relevant to face-to-face course environments, but we'll keep it to the online classroom for this discussion. And then finally, I'm going to be talking about some practical steps and strategies that can be used in your online classes to help foster that engagement that we all want to see from our students, and really to help bring forth the goals of education that we all have in our teaching. And I think that sometimes we lose sight of why we're doing what we're doing. And the course community, a learning community, can help us to really focus on why we're doing what we're doing, why we are in this profession, and what we're really trying to bring forth. So I want to share this photo with you as we get started. This is a group of graduates from a few years ago from our completely online graduate program here in the Department of Applied Engineering. These 6 students were our graduating class. I think it was the fall of 2016. And on this day, they met for the first time in person. So this group made arrangements to sit together at graduation. They walked across the stage one after the other. They joked around, and they posed together for a photo after the ceremony. And it dawned on me that we had a community in our classes. We're a small program in the graduate program, but we had developed a community there. And so I show you this photo to just tell you that even in an online course, you can help students foster relationships with one another. Our graduate program is a professional program designed for people who are working full-time, typically in the manufacturing sector. And so, like I said, these folks had never met before in person, and yet they knew one another when they did meet in person. And that was really a fulfilling moment for me as a professor, because I realized then that we had community in our program. And so I want to talk about some of the things that I do in my courses. And like I said, I'm not the voice of authority. I don't have it all figured out, but there are some things that I do in my classes that I think are particularly effective. And so I'll speak a little bit from my own experiences, but then I'm also going to pull some ideas from the literature as well. And like I said, if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to raise your hand or post those to the chat. So I guess the first question is, what is an online community? Community would imply that these people are together because of some common binding purpose between them. And a learning community in particular shares common goals, learning goals. There are opportunities in that learning community for collaboration, collaborative dialogue, collaborative projects and discussions. There is a sense of shared purpose that is fostered in an online community. The students have a feeling that they belong there in that group. There's definitely a sense of security and safety in that group. Because of course, when learning new concepts, there's an element of vulnerability there. If someone doesn't understand it very easily or has questions, you want there to be safety and security in that community. And so you want to develop a sense of trust and connection to others. And those others are other students, and then of course the instructor too. So the community has many different facets to it, but I felt that description was very accurate, in that you have this collaborative nature, and you had lots of opportunities for learning, rich learning experiences there. So I will talk about a learning community. So we said an online course community, and I'm gonna change that a little bit, Chris, if that's okay, to defining this as a learning community is really what we're wanting to develop in our classes. So you may be in a program where you have a cohort approach. Often learning communities do take a cohort approach, where a group of students moves through a series of classes together. And that isn't necessary, though, in order to have a learning community. It can take place in a single course. In our graduate program, we do not use a cohort model, but the program is small enough that those students, they have classes together and they get to know each other. It can be used, the cohort approach can be within a single discipline over a single theme, or it can be between disciplines. But that, like I said, a cohort approach isn't necessary in order for one to develop a learning community. It can be developed in a single class. So like I said, you're going to have common learning goals in that group. There are going to be opportunities for collaborative dialogue. And from the literature, I thought this was very interesting. collaborative actually means that there is a give and take in that process. You know, students will say, I really dislike group work. I don't like that. But really, collaboration is a necessary skill that students must learn in order to be successful in their professional lives. And so a learning community can provide well-designed opportunities for collaboration between students so that they learn this give and take and the exchange of ideas in an environment where they're learning that they don't have all the answers and that it really takes teams in many cases to make things happen. In a learning community, you should have a sense of shared purpose and a shared responsibility for learning. You've probably experienced this in your courses, but I learn so much from my students. You know, obviously, I develop the content for the class. I design the curriculum, but at the same time, we all have a responsibility for learning, and I must have that responsibility myself. In our program, we have students representing many different industries, everything from pharmaceutical to defense, the automotive industry, of course, in this area, medical device industry. I always learn something from those students. They teach me a lot each semester, and so we have this shared purpose that we're all going to learn new concepts, not just the students, but I typically do as well, and that helps me to improve as an instructor. Like I said earlier, you need to foster an atmosphere of belonging for the members of your learning community. Give them the sense that they belong there, that they're valued, that the work that they do in your class is going to be read and reviewed, and you're going to think about it critically and provide valuable feedback for the students. That's all part of giving them this atmosphere of belonging. And then you're developing trust and connection to others in the community too. So I say that I want to bring my whole person to the classroom. It's so tempting for us to just, and probably more so in the online class, just bring our professional selves to the classroom. But when you bring your whole self, your whole, you know, you're willing to be a little vulnerable and share elements of your life with the students, things that you are interested in. Remember that you are the subject matter expert teaching that class. And so you're going to develop trust and connection to the students by sharing the passion that you have for that subject matter. It's going to be something that will affect the atmosphere of that learning community. Well, developing a learning community is actually considered to be a high impact practice. And I learned this because of this book called, and I would recommend it, and I have a list of resources that I'm going to share in the Teams shared files after the presentation. But this book called High Impact Practices in Online Education, Research and Best Practices, this is chock full of high impact practices that will really promote rich learning experiences for students in college courses. And so I would highly recommend this to anybody who is looking for some kind of framework upon which to build a curriculum or to build a course. This is really helpful in giving ideas, and particularly case studies from other schools that have adopted some of these high impact practices. But a high impact practice is one that promotes deep active and collaborative learning, and they're associated with higher levels of academic challenge and student-faculty interactions. So I'll say that one more time. They promote deep, active, and collaborative learning and are associated with higher levels of academic challenge and student-faculty interactions. So developing a learning community is going to be very effective in helping your students to really learn the materials. And I guess, why is that important? Well, here comes the point about why do we do what we do? And, you know, there are great side effects to an online learning community. Better student retention, we all want that. I learned that the retention rate in online classes is lower than what you would have in a face-to-face class. And so we need to be really intentional about methods that will help those students to stick with us in a course. And developing an online learning community can help with that. We want to encourage higher order thinking in students. It isn't enough for students to just memorize rote facts. They need to be able to apply concepts to problem solving. We need to start thinking about how students are going to take what they've learned in the classroom and then allow that learning to impact wherever they land in society, in the workplace, in the home, in the school systems, in the healthcare systems. Really, human flourishing is the goal of what we are doing. It goes beyond a student learning a concept and earning a course credit and finally a degree. I think that sometimes we get a little lost in the weeds when we're teaching, and we lose sight of really why are we doing what we're doing. And so as I was researching online learning communities, I was personally encouraged to think of the big picture. You know, why do we want to develop these communities? We want students to flourish when they leave JSU, when they graduate. We want them to be productive and contributors to a better world, a better society. In our department, we say that our students learn engineering principles to make the world a better place. And so online learning communities can play a part in achieving that goal. It's a little bit lofty, I know, but I think that it's a worthy purpose to what we're doing. So engagement is really the key to developing a learning community. You want engagement between the professor and the students. You want the students to be engaged with the content, and you want the students to be engaged with one another. So there are three elements there of engagement that need to be examined in an online course. So imagine this with me for a moment. It's the first day of class, and we're in a classroom, and the instructor walks up to the podium on that first day and stands in front of the class, doesn't introduce herself, takes the textbook and says, I want you to read these chapters and answer these questions, and then closes the textbook and leaves the room. That's appalling. That's an appalling thought that someone would do that. But yet at the same time, that happens in online classes. And that's an extreme example, but that's not engaging, and it's certainly not collaborative or enriching. And so I think that looking at ways for students to engage with one another, with us, and with the content is key to developing an effective and active learning community. So there's a great article that's very straightforward and simple. And I used this as a basis for my presentation. And then I added other materials from the literature to it, as well as my own experiences. But it was from Faculty Focus, which is a great publication that you've probably read. And it was building community in online classrooms. And so the points in that article were just make yourself available. And we're going to go into these, and I'm going to add to these. Create a plan of communication for your students. Encourage interaction. Build outside class spaces within your course. And then bring the outside in terms of the college community. You know, online at JSU, online classes here, these students are still JSU students. And so that fifth point we'll talk about a little more, but I want to talk about each of these points in a few more details, but I guess before I go on, does anyone have any questions or comments before we start into this section?
No one has questions?
Or comments. This may have brought up some points that you're thinking about, so I would welcome any comments at this point.
Hey, Dana, can you hear me?
Yes, Todd. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I like what you had to say. That example of a teacher walking in on the first day and saying, "Okay, this is your job. Read the book," and then walking out. That's really brings home, I think, for me, kind of what I've been essentially doing in my online classes. And so I like that a lot. One thing, since you've been doing this since 2006, though, I wonder to what extent maybe some of what you're seeing, the lack of interaction from online professors, might have something to do with the fact that the technology now is only really just seems to be catching up a lot better for doing online coursework. Because I know when I started teaching, I think it was probably 2010 or so, you know, rapidly making lectures and doing videos where I communicate screen recordings with students. The technology just didn't quite seem to be there at the time, especially when we were on Blackboard, but it seems to be getting a lot better and making it easier for instructors to engage with their students. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I have a few thoughts on that. I would agree with you. Back in the early 2010s, it was very, very difficult to replicate a lot of the classroom experiences in the online environment. But it has become tremendously easier now to do that. And just the fact that a student, you know, I used to try to do have students do video presentations, and it was a technical nightmare for them to do that. Now that's become as easy. It's as easy as them voicing over a PowerPoint or getting out their phone or using a free screencasting software. But I will say there were methods. For example, for years I've used Google Hangouts. It's not called that anymore, but Google Hangouts, and we would have video conference calls in my online classes. Of course, now we have Teams, and so that's available to all the students, and it's a lot easier. So I agree with you. The technology made it really difficult to allow certain types of engagement. But the engagement was still possible.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Let's see, Sean. Yeah, Sean said. Yeah, Sean. Yeah, good point. Sean said Google Hangouts is now Google Meet.
Yes. Thanks, Sean.
I also think I agree with everything you said, Nana. I also think that there are some people in this meeting right now who started teaching online when this whole online thing became online. And so many of you were there when your administrators came to you and said, okay, I need your course online by next week. Right? So there are a lot of instructors across the country, through no fault of their own, that were told, okay, I need you to get online, but we're not giving much in the way of help or training or guidance. So I think that's also part of it. And then also, for the longest time, really the best way to have any kind of really back and forth communication was the dreaded discussion board. And I say dreaded because discussion boards used the right way can be excellent, but if they're not used the right way, man, they can really be a drag. So, anyway, so I think all of that, I just wanted to point to.
Sure. And this is, this is not meant to discourage anyone by providing some kind of, you better do this or your course isn't going to have any kind of sense of community. I think that just as many things with online instruction, very simple changes can bring about fantastic results in the course. And so I will talk about some of those. And the shift to online, the pivot, has certainly been drastic. But I'm very thankful that we're making that pivot now rather than in 2006 or 2010, because the technology does make it easier for us to make that change. Well, this is a Ronco Showtime rotisserie chicken cooker, and if you've seen the infomercials with Ronco, you know that the phrase that goes along with this is set it and forget it. You put the chicken in and you set it and you forget it. And unfortunately, there are some people that approach an online course with this same idea that I can just set it all up and then walk away and it's going to be good. But no, this is not the approach that you want to take for an online class. And I've heard people say this, set it and forget it for online, and no, that won't work. That isn't to say that advanced preparation isn't helpful. It most definitely is. But to have an online learning community, you need to have both the pre-planning of the curriculum, but then the presence of the instructor in the class as the class proceeds. And so I just wanted to add a little humor there, because I've heard the set it and forget it phrase a few times during my online teaching career. And we need to be careful about not just setting and forgetting our courses and our students. So the first idea towards engagement, the first principle, I suppose, is just making yourself available. The students need to see you in the class. They need to hear your voice. Seeing your face is great. And so making yourself available is really critical. This article I thought was helpful in that it said that, really the instructor is the touchstone for the class. The instructor is the model for citizenship in the course. So the way that you communicate with the students is going to be modeled by the students as they communicate with you and as they communicate with one another. If it's frequent, if it's sincere, if it's meaningful, if it is helpful, those things are going to be picked up very quickly by the students, and they are going to emulate what you're doing as an instructor. you should personalize your course with original content. That isn't to say that you can't use other sources. YouTube videos, for example, are great in the classes that I teach. You know, if I want to talk about a manufacturing concept in an online course, I can go to YouTube and find that technology in a very well-produced YouTube video that I can then share in my course. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about putting original content out there that comes from me, everything from a personal introduction with a photo of myself. Sometimes I include a photo of my family. I talk about where I grew up, where I'm from, where I've worked, how I relate to what they're doing. I bring my whole self to that introduction so that the students know who's teaching the class. And this is something that, you know, you can do in one course and then use that same introduction in the other courses that you're teaching. But that's something that will really start your course on the right foot, because the students know who they're interacting with, who's teaching them, and that it's the beginning of your establishing credibility with the students and developing rapport with the students. You can also create small lectures. You can do video announcements. All of those things make the course more personal. And so I would encourage you to do that. The great thing about Canvas is that you can do these announcements and posts ahead of time and then schedule them to appear when you want them to publish. So that's helpful. You can build rapport by sharing a little bit about your life outside the classroom. I think that there is a misconception that in order to have a vibrant, active online community, it needs to be led by some charismatic, real super big personality type of individual in order to pump everybody up and get them enthusiastic about the learning. I would disagree with that. I think you need to be authentic. You need to be who you are and not try to be somebody else. But I think that you can share about, you know, your life outside the classroom in terms of, you know, did anyone go to the JSU football game this weekend? Or if something happens in manufacturing, which is the field that I'm in, that I've read in the in my news feed about manufacturing, I may want to share that. I've shared interesting podcasts that relate to the material that we're talking about. Like I said earlier, you're the subject matter expert in the course, and showing your passion for the content is going to be something that the students pick up on, and help them to realize that not everything is for a grade. I'm going to share a podcast with you, and I'm sharing it with you because this really helped me to understand a concept more or to learn about this related topic, and I think it will be helpful to you too. There's an article that I'll share in the resources called The Power of Positive Regard, and it's simply said, it's just showing that you care about the students, you care about their development, you care about their learning experience, and sharing about your life outside the classroom is one way that you can do that. So your enthusiasm will influence how the students engage with the content. So just like the theoretical person who walks to the podium and gives the textbook assignment, you can share your enthusiasm, and the students are going to pick up on that enthusiasm. But if you're just giving a PowerPoint to view, a reading for them to complete, and a quiz, that's not really generating a lot of enthusiasm for the content. And so think of ways that you can add that interest. Sorry, something happened with my slides. Okay. I guess before we move on, does anyone have a method that you've used in your course that you've found effective in terms of building rapport with the students that you'd like to share? Heidi? Go ahead.
Oh, unmute. Okay. I was trying to get it to unmute and it was not responding. Yeah, just like you said, the whole letting people know, like I even found after moving courses online in the spring that, you know, I made a video and said, okay, so one of the reasons that I'm taking this particular assignment out is because even me thinking about having to try to grade that during this time makes me anxious because it feels like everything is in the air and I don't know if you're going to have access to resources. So I'm sure if it's making me anxious, it's probably making you anxious. So let's just take that assignment out and not deal with that. And I got like 10 emails going, oh, you're anxious too? Like, I'm struggling with this. And it really opened up that dialogue of like, oh, it's okay to admit that not everything is going well right now. And so I have found in a lot of classes of just admitting that, you know, this is hard or I have to work at this too. Like I tell students all the time when they're complaining about writing research papers, I'm like, I hate writing research papers. It's hard for me and I procrastinate. So I put deadlines in here to help you because that's the only way I write papers. If I don't have a deadline, it doesn't happen. So, and then they're like, oh, it's hard for you. I thought since you were a professor, it was all easy. And I'm like, no, it's the thing I hate the most. So I don't know. I just try to be open with them about what I struggle with and what's hard for me. And that makes them feel like, oh, it's okay that you don't have everything together. So it's okay to be a work in progress.
I agree. I don't think we have to be an open book necessarily, but being transparent about certain things is I found that to be really helpful too. Thanks for sharing that. Rodney.
Sure. And this is probably not something that is applicable for every class, but I know with my survey courses, since they're so large, what I've tried to do is in certain semesters, since they're hybrid or blended, I should say, I've split the class in half. So instead of having in the past 38, 39 students, maybe 40 in a class, I have 20. And basically, I would give the students a choice of the authors that they would like to study. And I feel like by doing that, it gives them a little bit more accountability and it also gets them invested in the course just a little bit more so that we're only studying the authors that they are interested in, you know, and since they're interested in it, I feel like they're invested a little bit more and the results have been really, really good. I've only had maybe one semester where the results did not turn out like I'd hoped. But for the most part, it's been great. The students are engaged and they really are interested in the material. So that's just one of the ways that I like to get students engaged.
I like that. Thank you. The next point is about making a plan to communicate. The online environment is not our natural habitat. And so when we communicate, it needs to be very intentional and deliberate. And I tell my students that you know it's not quite as easy as just sticking around after class to ask some questions or dropping by the office to ask some questions. You need to be intentional about this. And so as the touchstone, as the model of digital citizenship for your course, you need to have a plan in place because when the semester arrives and it is a flurry of activity, sometimes we can forget about these non-urgent but yet very important things that we can do to establish a better sense of community. So make a plan to reach out to your students both collectively and individually. One idea that I read about that I really liked was a plan, and this obviously in a really large class would be quite difficult or impossible to do, but in smaller classes at a teaching-centric university like JSU may be more possible, but just plan to reach out to students collectively and then individually as well during the second or third week of classes. And this is just a means of saying, you know, I'm just checking how's everything going in the course for you. Do you have any questions that I could answer? And then be prepared to answer and follow up on the answers that you don't know. That can be very helpful. Some learning communities plan online meeting events. This article was written before our current situation where we have a lot of online meetings, but in an asynchronous class, you can plan for the occasional online meeting events. So in my graduate program, it is asynchronous to provide the greatest degree of flexibility for the students because they tend to be working full-time in industry. But once a semester, I like to have a conference call or an online meeting with the students. And it's an assignment because we have a live discussion with questions that I send them ahead of time for them to research and reflect on. And so that can be another means of communication as well. In the course Start Here or your syllabus, you can say how you're going to provide your feedback and when. So when you, a lot of students, we have to remember, and I think, Rodney, I got this from one of your presentations, and it was really helpful, a helpful reminder to me. We use a lot of vocabulary that our students are not familiar with. For example, a rubric or a prerequisite or something like that. So when I tell students that I'm going to be grading their assignments using a rubric, I need to remember that they may not know what a rubric is or where to find it or what that means and how to find that feedback after it's been provided. And so feedback is important in having a plan for how you're going to communicate that feedback. Designing a shared space for students in your course to engage in discussion with one another and with the instructor is helpful. That can be a place where students share job opportunities, or they just talk about questions they may have about an assignment. So in one of the courses that I teach, it's a manufacturing simulation class where we use simulation software to simulate a manufacturing system. And, they're having to load this software onto their computers at home and figure out the settings and so on. So having a discussion board in the class where they can talk about the technical aspects of assignments, for example, in a class like that has been really helpful, because then they're not emailing me with all of their questions. And if someone asks a question in the discussion board, often it will be answered by someone else. So that's helpful too. When you communicate with students, remind them that you're available to help them. You can direct them to resources available on campus. You can provide answers to their questions and so on. But when you talk to students, remind them that you are there to support their success. That's what I tell the students. I tell them I have office hours for you. They're not for me, and I want to see you, and I want to know your questions and concerns, and I want you to feel free to share those with me. And so that's something that students need to hear on a regular basis. Okay, I'm just reading some of the comments. Yeah, Teams is really going to help us with communicating in the online environment. I think if there's a silver lining to any of what we've been going through recently, I think that learning these technologies, being forced to do that, is in the long run going to be helpful, even though it's been painful in many ways initially. All right, I need to move on because I don't want to go over an hour. All right, encouraging interaction. So the online environment should be interactive, and often in an online course, this is the interaction that we have. You have a student interacting with the course content, and that's it. Well, what you see here on the screen, the student and the course content, that's a correspondence course. That is not an online course. That's something like you could order over the phone back in the 70s that would, teach something, but this is not what we should be striving for in the online environment. There's more to it. And so what we need to look at is ways for the student to obviously engage with the course content. We need to look for ways for the student to engage with the instructor, and then for the student to engage with other students. So there are really 3 elements to engagement, to interaction in classes. And when you see it laid out like this, I hope that it helps you think through opportunities that you present in your class for interaction. So what can we do to foster interaction? It's not going to happen organically. Like I said, the online environment is not our natural habitat, so we need to be intentional about it. How does one encourage interaction with the course content? How do you encourage student-student interaction? So I'm going to get into that on these next slides. We've already talked about how to be more interactive as an instructor, so I'm going to focus on interacting with the course content and then student-student interaction. So encouraging interaction with content. Vary the content presentations, vary the ways that you're presenting the material to the student. It's tempting to have every module look the same, but think of ways to provide some variety there so you can have different media for the student to review, such as video presentation, whether it be your original content or something that you found elsewhere. Reading assignments from the text, from the literature. Podcasts can be very helpful. I found podcasts to be really helpful, and my students really enjoy them because they can listen to them on the go, in the car or going for a walk. They really like that. I try to offer my students the audio version of some of the textbooks that I use, particularly in the graduate class, have an audio book version for several of them. And so I try to share that audiobook version with the students so that they can listen to the audiobook for the class rather than having to read the actual book. So think about ways that the content can be presented in different ways. As opposed to a 90-minute class on campus, think about, and the term is often used, chunking material so that you can provide snippets of information for greater retention and for shorter attention spans, and to provide more flexibility for the student. Think about making a short video explaining a single concept, for example, or have part of the material presented with a video, a short reading, and so on, rather than a full-length lecture, as we may be tempted to do. So you may be tempted to say, well, I've got this slide deck that I use in my face-to-face class that I present, so I'm just going to voice that over. I'm just going to voice that over and make a video of that for the online class. That may be a mistake because it's probably going to be too long for consumption. So you want to look at brief chunks of material. Allow reflective writing or discussion. We're an engineering department, and so you wouldn't think that we would encourage a lot of reflective writing or discussion, and yet in several of my classes, I do encourage this of the students. This can be helpful in terms of them thinking about what they're actually learning and how that may apply to when they go out in industry. So often I teach one course that's flipped, where all the material is provided online prior to the class meeting, and they need to provide me with a learning summary after they've reviewed the content. And that's a reflective writing exercise where they have to actually think about, what did I learn and how could this apply to my professional life? Another idea that I read about that I really liked, one way to really encourage interaction and a love of learning with the content, is to create some low stakes assignments. And what I mean by that are assignments that are not going to make or break their grade in the class, but they allow the student to interact with the content and complete some kind of assignment with the content, but there's not going to be a fear of failing if they don't do well on it. And so low stakes assignments are not for a lot of points. You can provide feedback, and that provides additional interactivity and engagement with the content. Encouraging student interaction. So we talked about the dreaded discussion boards. I try to have just one of those per term. I serve as the moderator, and when a thread is exhausted, I close it and move on to a new one. I have a rubric and very specific requirements for the board. But what I'm not requiring them to do is to provide a certain number of quotes or a certain number of words or restrictive things like that. It's more criteria such as responding to other students rather than just, speaking into an echo chamber of discussion board environment. Things like posting regularly throughout the week. Things like taking concepts from the materials and then relating them to real world experiences in manufacturing. So discussion boards, and it's really beyond the scope of our discussion here, but discussion boards can be effective if used in a very limited way, and you're providing really clear instructions. One thing that Canvas, one feature of Canvas that I really enjoy is the peer review feature. So in my hybrid flipped class, this term I had students do online presentations at the end of the semester rather than a final exam. And then I reviewed those presentations, but also two of their peers reviewed each presentation using the same rubric that I used, and they had to give helpful comments to the student. That is a way to really encourage the students to interact with each other, and it encourages the student who's creating the content, such as the video presentation, that more than one person is actually going to watch it. Like I said, video presentations allow students to hear one another's voices and see one another's faces, and this can be a really helpful kind of presentation for assignment for students to do. And then, like I said, live discussions, what I used to call conference calls in Google Hangouts, I would take a small group of students, no more than 5, and provide them with questions ahead of time, and we would meet and then talk through those questions and discuss their answers. And that was really helpful because that was the closest thing to face-to-face that we could experience in the online environment. And when you have a smaller group get together, it allows everyone to participate and to get to know one another. I'd also record those conference calls and then post them in Blackboard when we had Blackboard. And then those who didn't participate in certain calls could view the other calls. So that was I think it was a helpful activity for building community in the class. Something else that is recommended is building outside class spaces within your course. You see a cup of coffee there. A water cooler type discussion board is typically really helpful. I have a discussion board for help with assignments, but I've also had them just for, I call it the student lounge, and the students can go in there and talk about, particularly ours, talk about a job opportunity that they may be aware of, or things of that nature. So that can be helpful. And finally, my last point is bringing the outside in. We can't forget that online students are every bit as much a part of the student community here at JSU as our face-to-face students. In fact, many of those online students are right here on campus. And so we need to think about ways to bring the university community to them and encourage students to participate in the campus community. So if it's appropriate to the course that you're teaching, you can encourage the students to participate in activities on campus that may be related to your course. You can encourage them to attend events, and if there aren't events on campus that are related to your majors, you can ask them to attend a webinar and do an assignment related to that webinar as part of their course credit. And I would add that we should be encouraging students to utilize the campus resources and support systems that are available to them. We can help our students in certain ways, but there are other areas in which we can't. And so it's key for us to be prepared to steer our students in the direction that they need to go and towards the resources that they need to be successful. And I think overall, we just need to be ambassadors for the college community and encourage students to become involved and to take advantage of the opportunities that are here on campus if they're local and if they're able to participate in those. You can even, in our department, we have events that are for the department, and we invite our online students to attend those events, such as alumni career panels. We had a welcome back event with Cocky on the first day of class last year. Things like that, those are open to our online students, and we want our online students to attend career fairs and things like that, workshops. So make sure that you're including your online students in those kind of events. Well, it's 3:32, so I've gone a couple minutes over, or maybe I haven't, because I think I started at 2:32. So I just want to encourage you all that, you know, and we can all improve in this area in terms of just developing and creating online learning communities within our areas. This is really going to, you know, be beneficial to the students, and we'll benefit from it too, because we'll learn from them. So I hope that this was helpful to somebody, and if anyone has any questions or comments, I'd be welcome to, I'll be open to those.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
It's Joanne Gates. I'm trying to teach my class asynchronously, which means you don't have to do anything at a certain time. And you said you invited, you know, 5 or 6 at a time to do group works. I'd love a kind of simple program where you could do sign up for this slot. I think there's something in Canvas where they see the sign up opportunities, but they don't see other students' names. You know, they just see that it's full and pick another time. Does anybody know anything about that?
So you
Yes,
can use
yes.
Go ahead, Chris.
What were you going to say, Dana?
I was just going to say that I'm not really sophisticated when it comes to that. I'll say that, you know, we're going to have a conference call, a group discussion during this week for this module, corresponding with this module. And to be honest with you, I just put up a shared document. In the past, I just did it in Google Docs, and I said, please sign up for the date and time that works for you. And I may have 4 or 5 slots under each day and time, and then we'll just see who is available and go from there.
Yeah, that does work. Joanna, what you're talking about is there's the scheduler, and it's attached to the Canvas calendar.
Okay.
And I can record a video for you later to show you how to do that.
Okay, that'll be great. Thank you.
Patrick?
I think he answered my question. Thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you all for taking the time. I hope this was helpful, and I will post that list of resources in the team shared folder, and look forward to next week. Thanks.
Thank you, Dana.
You're very
Thank
welcome.
you so much. That was awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, all right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Have a good day.